So let's start with the reality check. I don't know about you guys, but I'm, isolated here at home and, you know, struggling to kind of put context to this, get scope to this. None of us have ever experienced anything like this before, unless we have a 102-year-old on the phone that experienced the 1918 pandemic. So there's so much that's uncertain and so much that's changing quickly. And I don't know about you guys, but I uh, do turn on the news every now and then, and it seems like it's the same news over and over, just bigger numbers, bigger impact. And it leaves us with the questions of how contagious is this, how deadly is this, how long is this going to last? And we have varying opinions of all of those things, and it's hard to grasp uh, what the future is going to look like, because we know things are going to change. And so anxiety is really a natural outcome of all this. And I think one of the important things that we want you to take away from this is, like, it's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to feel afraid of the uncertainty. But let's try to ground that in our experiences, what we know, what we can control, and create a plan forward. So we need to realize that it's disrupted everybody's life. Some in good ways, and in some in bad ways. I mean, some businesses are really running off, uh, you know, running really well and at really high levels, and others obviously have been devastated. So, but all of us are experiencing disruption, and that anxiety is something that we have to learn to deal with. And know that it's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters. That if we are going to be resilient, that we have to think about how are we going to react, and not just be victims to the situation, and make an impact where we can and identify those areas. So obviously the COVID-19 crisis is impacting us in all of these different spheres: the business sphere, the community and economy, uh, family, psychological. And one of the reasons Ann and I thought about putting this webinar together was that so much of what's being put out there is really focused on the business and the economy. Um, that we felt, especially in a family business context, where the family unity and cohesion is such an integral part of long-term success in family businesses, that we should spend some time talking about what is the impact of this crisis on the family part of the entity, and how do we protect the family unity and cohesion? How do we build family unity, cohesion, and how do we become more resilient in dealing with this crisis? So, we've heard on the news, and through many different avenues, about all the impacts on the business: cash flow challenges, layoffs. I mean, we all heard the unemployment numbers yesterday, staggering numbers which we've never seen before. Uh, our businesses have scheduling challenges. We're worried about our employees' safety. We have all of those people who are on the front lines, that we hear their stories day to day. We've got the community impact of the falling stock market, the real human impact. One of the things that it seems like every day, this situation gets closer and closer to home. You know, 3 weeks ago, I didn't know anybody who was really affected by this, and now 3 weeks later, I know two people who passed away, four people who have it, and it seems like it's getting closer and closer. But really, we're going to spend most of our time talking about the family impact in the context of family business. We know that there are impacts of childcare and switching to online schooling. We're in close quarters. I actually live at home alone, and so I'm in a debate with my brothers every day about whether it's better to be sequestered alone in your house, or have your wife and kids with you as well. Sometimes I feel like I'd love to have more family with me, and my brothers feel like they like to get rid of their kids every now and then. So these close quarters can increase the stress and the disrupted routines, etc. So all of this leads to the inevitable psychological impacts of anxiety, sometimes depression, stress, and sometimes substance abuse. If there's any substance issues in our family, often substance abuse issues really uh, will spike in times like this. So being attentive to that, I think it's so easy right now with the needs of focusing on the business, the real, very real business challenges. It's very easy to overlook the taking care of the psychological health of individuals in our family. So we're going to spend some time talking about how we do that. So as I said, anxiety is a natural outcome of all of this uncertainty. And we need to realize that that really impacts our decision making, and it reduces our ability to focus, and can sometimes paralyze us from making decisions and lead to a sense of powerlessness. And if we don't manage that, if we don't uh, acknowledge that the anxiety is there and find ways to manage it, it can become a social contagion. Our anxiety can spread from uh, ourselves to others within our organization, within our families, to our kids, especially in times like this. This is what our kids look to us for help with, is helping them manage their anxiety and work through it. So we need to each take responsibility and have self-awareness of our own anxiety and manage it. And then our leadership, both in our business and our family, has to acknowledge the anxiety that's there and find ways to manage it, talk about it, and make sure that it doesn't distract our focus, that it doesn't reduce our ability to make decisions and make us feel powerless. We also need to know that, in the stress of a crisis, this can either be a force that shakes the existing emotional fault lines in our family, or this can be a galvanizing force that brings the family together in a common sense of purpose. And oftentimes the balance between these two is family leadership and governance. Are our family leaders stepping up and helping us to make sure that how we get through this crisis is a galvanizing force and brings us together, rather than something that increases the existing fault lines in the family? What matters most in these situations is how we support each other and stay connected through these challenging times. And that takes a lot of communication. You know, in general, if we're not communicating, any of the existing emotional fault lines in our family are going to tend to get worse. And if we don't manage the stress of this crisis and the emotional impact in our families, we're creating the opportunity to create new fault lines that will last for generations moving forward. So attending to the family needs is really critical and important. But let's be realistic here. The CEO of our company has to be focused on the business. So we're going to need leadership from other parts of the family in order to deal with this. Our CEO needs to be focused on the business, on survival. So we need to find other ways for the family to get some of those family emotional needs met, and we need leadership from other parts of the family. So the ray of hope is that most family businesses are very well positioned to weather this storm. I remember these stories from the recession in 2008, 2009, is that most of our families, when I talked to them through this, they were like, this is okay, we're going to get through this. I talked to a 40-year-old general counsel of a 100-plus-year-old family business. And I was talking to him in, I think, 2009, and he's like, we made it through the Depression. We made it through 2 world wars. We're going to be fine. And I'm sitting here thinking, you're 40 years old. You didn't make it through those things. But this institutional memory that he had, because the family business had been around so long, really gave him a sense of grounding. Another family that talked about, they're in the construction business, and they said, we pool money. So, because we know when we go into these natural recessions that happen every decade or two, that's an opportunity for us. That's an opportunity for us to buy equipment at cheap levels. So it's actually a part of their strategy. So family businesses with lower debt, strong values and culture, a long-term view, goals that are more than just financial goals, and a smaller and more committed shareholder group really are well positioned to manage their way through this storm. And what I like to say is it's really about speed to action with long-term thinking. If we're unified and connected as a family and as a leadership group, if we have a clear strategy, a clear sense of values, and a clear vision, we can act faster than most businesses can in this crisis. And it reminds me of a story of a family that uh, one of their divisions cans cherries. And this was maybe 10 years ago, there was a crisis where 90% of the cherry crop was wiped out by a hard freeze. And they were able to switch from paying in purchase orders to paying in cash within 24 hours, where their larger publicly traded competitors, it took them months to get that type of change through. So they were able to capture more of the uh, cherry crop. So if we're unified and we have a clear vision as a family about how we're going to work through some of these things, we can often move faster than our competitors. So all of that's just to say there's hope for us as family businesses, is that we have some advantages. We just need to recognize them and take advantage of them. And some of you who've been through some of my classes may recognize this diagram, but it's really kind of trying to, this is based on the work of John Boyd, who was an pilot in the Air Force, and was able to develop this type of strategy, which is the idea is that we have an orientation, which is where we're going. It's kind of like our flight plan. We get up into the air. When we file a flight plan, we say, we're going to go here. We're going to go from Chicago to San Diego. We're going to fly at this height, at this speed, etc. And then we get up in the air and we have to deal with the reality of what's happening and make decisions and act on them. And sometimes we have to fly higher. We have to fly at a different speed, and we have to observe the changes in our environment. So this is a loop that we go through. And the family's strategic advantage is that we can do this faster. Most families have a clearer orientation of what they're trying to do. They can move to decision and action faster, and they can learn from that as fast as possible. And that's really going to be the key as a family to getting through this crisis, because things are changing so quickly, is can we maintain our orientation? Do we have a clear orientation about where we're going? And can we move to decision and action quickly enough and observe the changes that are happening quickly enough so that we can make the decisions we need to make? And the foundation of this orientation are our values and our culture, our sense of mission and vision for what we're trying to do, and then also the strategies and tactics. But oftentimes we lean on the strategy and tactics because they're more tangible. When we're clear about our values and our mission and our objectives, it makes it much easier for everybody to make decisions moving forward. So we should always keep in mind that this ray of hope is that one's best successes often come after their greatest disappointments. There was an interesting research article today that came out of MIT that some of you might be interested in, is that this was looking at the 1918 pandemic, and it showed that the communities that were more proactive in addressing the crisis, so they recognized the crisis faster and reacted to it faster, were the ones that recovered faster. So if you think about that in the context of what we're doing, if we're trying to maintain the clearest sense of reality that we can, and moving as quickly as we can to address and assess the problems that are coming, it's going to position us much better to move forward after the crisis than before. So let's talk about what is resilience. And this comes out of the work of a University of Chicago social worker named Froma Walsh. But she described resilience as the ability to withstand and rebound from stressful life challenges, strengthened and more resourceful. So this isn't a question of you're resilient or not. This is not a binary thing. It's a spectrum of resiliency. And what we're talking about is how do we become more resilient? And obviously, a part of that is going through some of life's challenges. When you've had to work through struggles before and come through them, you build a sense of resiliency. So we can also see this as an opportunity to build and learn and become stronger and grow stronger as a family and as a business. So this context of resilience, I think, is really important, especially in the midst of all of this noise going on. It's very easy to get stuck in the immediate here and now. And certainly we have to deal with the here and now, but we also want to be thinking about what can we be doing to make sure that we emerge more strengthened and more resourceful. During the last recession, there was some research that showed that the companies that did fewer layoffs and were able to hold on to workers through the crisis actually rebounded faster because they didn't have to hire, they didn't have to onboard. So they were better positioned. So the immediate reaction might be to just cut without really considering what's the time frame, when is a recovery likely, or are we going to rebound once we get through the crisis. So that's part of what building resilience is about. It's not just dealing with the immediate crisis, but thinking about moving forward. How do we bounce back stronger and more resourceful? This is important because, in family businesses, families tend towards homeostasis. Families like the predictable. They like the normal patterns, because if you think about the purpose of a family is to typically to nurture and raise children and give them a sense of predictability. So we like to have a normal set of ups and downs. So families try to seek a level of stability. And the other thing is that in wealthy families, oftentimes we don't come up against the normal obstacles that other people in life do. I use the kind of maybe a little bit of a silly example, but before I inherited my ownership in our family business and some of my wealth, when I was in graduate school and had student loans and all these things, $100 speeding ticket was a big deal to me, and now many, many years later, after having inherited my ownership and accumulated wealth, $100 speeding ticket is a minor annoyance. So the silly example, but sometimes in wealthy families, because our kids don't have to struggle and overcome some of the obstacles that other children do, they have lost opportunities for growth and resilience. And so in wealthy families, oftentimes we have to create some of those obstacles for them. So yes, we have the ability to buy you something, but you can't have that, So we have to put those obstacles in place. So we don't want to shield the next gen from challenges, because if our next gen has never faced a challenge and then something like this comes along, it's going to be much harder for them to weather the storm. But we know that change in the world is moving faster and faster and creating more stress. So it's important for us to have this resilience frame. And the idea is not that we're not going to avoid failure. We just want to learn from it as quickly as possible. And so you can think about resilience as individuals. Who in our family are the most resilient individuals and why? Who are the people that I know in my life that are resilient individuals, and what are their characteristics? What can I learn from them? Is our business resilient? Are we planning for potential downturns? Or do we have crisis plans that we can put into place? And then, of course, family resilience. And I'm going to dig a little deeper into the family piece right now and talk about, how long-standing family businesses survive crises like this. So let's talk about what makes long-standing family businesses resilient. And this is based on research that looked at families that have been together for over 200 years together. Many of these families had survived crises like this over generations. And what this research found was that ownership unity and family cohesion built the resilience of their family business. That while we would think that it's solving the business challenges that sustains family businesses, really the families that survive over multiple generations really build and maintain a strong sense of ownership, unity, and cohesion in their family businesses. And what do I mean by that? I mean a feeling of unity that gives us a common sense of purpose and leads us to joint action. You know, I like to say when we're talking about me rather than we in a family business, uh, we're in trouble. If we're talking about our rights as shareholders rather than our responsibilities as shareholders, we're in trouble. We have to be building a sense of unity and commitment to the larger group, and that involves having a common goal, common sense of purpose with each other, and then acting on that together. Um, you know, one of the things that is really critical here is that this is a paradox here. You know, so on one end of the spectrum you've got individual interest, on the other end of the spectrum you've got collective interest, and you can't exist exclusively on either end of the spectrum. In order for an individual to be willing to commit to supporting the common purpose of the whole, they have to believe that the collective cares about them as an individual and will take into account their opinions and their ideas at an appropriate level. So we have to manage that paradox in building this sense of unity. And what this research showed was that there were four main dimensions of cohesion that will need to be present over time in family businesses. Business financial cohesion. So in order for us to survive for multiple generations, we have to have enough financial success in the business to survive. Family financial success. So we use the finances of the family to help each other and meet the needs of family members. So we pay for education, we help with down payments on a house. The family financial and business financial are important parts of cohesion, and we need them at times. But the research showed that financial variables were necessary but not sufficient. If you wanted to survive for 200 years or more, really you had to have a strong sense of basic family attachment and a strong sense of pride and identity in what we were doing together in our business enterprise together. So the question is, what have we done to cultivate that family emotional attachment and that business emotional attachment? And when, you know, so the reason that the financial variables are necessary but not sufficient is that, so now that we're in a time where there's a potential downfall on the financial side, that our financials are now uncertain, what is going to sustain us through that? What sustains us through that are our family relationships and the sense of pride and commitment to what we're doing together in the community, our business emotional attachment. So, you know, again, kind of referencing back to the recession of 2008, 2009, many people thought an organization like the Family Business Center might get quieter because, you know, of the reduction in in financial resources. But what we found was kind of the old Warren Buffett: when the tide goes out, you find out who's wearing their swim trunks. When the financial crisis hit and we weren't able to buy cohesion through paying out dividends, through giving money to family to keep cohesion, it was the families that had a strong sense of family emotional attachment and a strong sense of pride in their business that were able to weather the storm. They were the ones who would get up there and say, "Not on my watch. This isn't going down on my watch." So even if you feel like maybe you don't have those strong emotional or business emotional cohesion right now, this is actually an opportunity to build it. Can you frame things in a way that makes people feel part of something bigger, a bigger goal and objective, and build that sense of family emotional pride and cohesion? Can we make this an opportunity to fix that fault line in our family rather than exacerbate the fault line in our family? So that was research specifically on family business. What I'm going to talk about right now is more specifically about families. Again, I referenced Froma Walsh earlier in that definition. This is from her work. So Resilient families have strong beliefs, strong organization, and strong communication. Again, these aren't binary things, these are spectrums. But let's start with beliefs. Having a shared sense of meaning can really help in a crisis. If we have a positive outlook, and if we have a commitment to something greater than ourselves, that can make us more resilient. It makes us feel like we're not alone. Um, we've all encountered people who their natural tendency is, I'm going to control everything myself. That may be good in the short term in dealing with the immediate crisis, but it doesn't build the fabric of the family for the long term to weather future storms, right? So yes, dad can fix all the problems and solve all the problems at great physical and emotional cost to him in the immediate, but he's not building the resiliency of the next generation. He's not involving anybody in the decision making. So we're not actually building the resiliency of the family. So we need to have strong belief systems. We need to have a positive outlook, and we need to have something that's bigger than ourselves. For many families, that's faith, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a higher, what I call higher order goals. That something that we believe in. That, you know, there's one family that has a mission to cure cancer, right? That's one of their, that's a higher order goal. And so many of the things that they do are oriented towards that. Resilient families have to have a family structure. So what I call dynamic stability. You need enough stability and predictability that you can operate, but enough flexibility that you can change with the world around you. So the metaphor I use here is, it's like if you're building a house or a building in San Francisco, you know an earthquake's going to happen, right? You don't necessarily know when it's going to come or what the magnitude of it is, but you want to build a house that can withstand that. In order to do that, you have to have enough stability or rigidity for the building to stand, but enough flexibility for it to absorb the shock of the earthquake. Because if your building's too rigid, the building will fall from the shock of the earthquake. And that's really what we mean in terms of organization, is what's the family structure that will help us provide mutual support to each other and help us keep connected. So in a large family business where you've got a lot of family members, this includes your board and your family council and your family leadership who's helping people stay connected in times like this. So resilient families really possess both flexibility and stability. So they know that they have to change at times, and that you can't treat a teenager you can't treat a next generation member like a 13-year-old when they're 25, right? So we have to be able to grow and adapt as a family and stay connected at the same time. You know, if we just distance ourselves from each other and don't talk about things, that does not help make things any better. We need to work through things together, which comes to the third key to resilience, which is really communication. Communication, is it clear? Is it tolerant and encouraging? So are we, again, this is something where as family members, whether we're working in the business or not, people are looking to us for the emotional cues around our family business. So even if we're just a shareholder, if I'm freaking out and portraying that anxiety, people are looking to us, and that anxiety will be contagious. So we have to know and manage communication and make sure that we're managing it in a way that's encouraging. In resilient families, emotions and opinions are expressed freely, fostering proactive, collaborative problem solving. Again, if we think about how we're dealing with this crisis as a family, if we're expecting one person in the family to take it all on and do it all themselves, we're not actually building the resiliency of our family long term. We're going to need multiple leaders in many different ways to get through this. And again, our business leaders are probably not going to have either the time bandwidth or the emotional bandwidth to also lead the effort to stay connected as a family. So we may want to think about identifying, if we haven't already, who are going to be the family leaders who are going to help the family stay connected and communicate through this adversity, and build that sense of connection as a family. So what can family leadership do in the face of this crisis? So this is getting a little more specific, and I'm going to talk about it in 3 different spheres. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start with talking within the family. What can we do to talk within the family to build the family connection, to build that sense of cohesiveness that will enable us to be more resourceful, not just coming out of this crisis, but going into future crises? What do we as a family need to communicate to the business? And what do we as a family need to communicate to the external world? These are all channels of communication that our family leadership should be thinking about and coordinating with our business leadership. So we want all of these things to be taking place. So within the family, I think one of the keys here is our goal needs to be to calm anxieties and communicate regularly, right? Just as we're communicating hopefully regularly as a business, we're communicating regularly with the family about what's changing, what can we expect, what's within our control, what's without our control. And our family leadership needs to frame the issue so it doesn't feel overwhelming, that it doesn't feel infinite. So emphasize the sense of common purpose of what we're trying to accomplish together. And that may have to shift a little bit from what your plans were entering into this crisis. And focus on what you can control. Again, it can be as simple as having a regular routine can give you a sense of control. If I can predict what my schedule is going to be, for me, this is a little silly, but it's the 5:30 news. I don't watch any news throughout the day. I watch the 5:30 news and that's it. And that routine gives me a sense of control over the world, right? Monitor what you can't control, right? So if, that obviously we can't immediately control the trajectory of this pandemic. We can only control our reactions and contributions to it, but we still need to monitor the things that we can't control and then decide when it will impact us. So our leadership needs to frame these issues, especially for kids and the younger ones in the family, because that will help contain that anxiety. Be honest about the hardships and impact that are going to come of this, right? It creates greater uncertainty and can create greater risks if we tell people that everything's going to be all right and then it's not, So be honest about the hardships and impact that's going to come down the road, and try to be clear about what we can do to manage that impact. Be as transparent as possible or appropriate. So if we're making layoffs, we want to be transparent about why and how, but it may not be appropriate to tell family shareholders who's getting let off, and until it may not be appropriate to tell them until later on. So be as transparent as possible. And the other thing is, and this is something that often gets lost in the mix here, is listen to the family. Family leadership needs to listen. Communication is a two-way street. I think a lot of people right now are talking about what information do we need to get to the family, and how do we keep them in the loop. But we also need to listen to the family and understand what their concerns are and what are their biggest anxieties, because oftentimes there are practical things we can do to help manage that. But if we're not listening, we're just reacting, then we're really putting ourselves in a bad position. And then the last piece is we want to think about the potential time horizons and recovery plans. So while none of us can completely predict what the recovery or the time horizon for this pandemic is going to be, we can start to look at the data and what the data can tell us. We can start to plan for different time horizons. So for the boards that I work with, I'm encouraging them to think about, so what's your plan if the recovery starts to come around in 6 months? What's the recovery going to look like if it starts to come around in 12 months? And do you have a plan to deal with those different scenarios and the impact of that? And that plays out with the family too, is can we give the family a sense of what is the time horizon of this, and how are we going to recover? Use your governance system. Hopefully some of you have formalized your governance processes. So the board, just as the family leadership sets the frame for the family, the board needs to set the frame for the business, the employees, and the leadership, working with the leadership of the company. The board needs to make sure we have effective communication processes and business processes in place to deal with the quickly changing environment. They need to monitor and drive the practice of how we're implementing these ideas and communicate regularly. The family council needs to monitor the alignment of all what we're doing with our values and our decisions. So, whenever we're in difficult situations like this and we're having troubles making a decision, I always encourage families to go back to what are our values. How would our values inform making this decision? Because if we do that, we're usually in a much better place than just reacting. But the family council needs to communicate regularly with the family so management can focus on the business crisis. So what some families have done in this situation is they've had their family council leader as a part of their COVID-19 war room, so to speak. They've established a group of leaders who are regularly dealing with the impact, and they include their family council leader on that, so that family council leader can be thinking about how do we need to communicate some of this information to the family. Consider doing regular virtual updates. I think in this age of social isolation that we can't understate the impact of the isolation, and even just having a virtual a Zoom call like this where we can see each other's faces increases that sense of connectedness. I mean, I can tell you I've had a few virtual dinner parties and cocktail parties, and it really does help people feel more connected. And if we can talk about some of the challenges that we're facing virtually, it can increase that sense of connection. And then, of course, we always have email and phone, but I think the visual piece is an important part of that. So I talked about listening to the family. So make the family feel heard. So your family, these are some open-ended questions, and open-ended questions in a situation like this are always going to create more connection. And make sure that you're fully listening and not reacting to what somebody is saying before they finish talking, which is a common family pattern. I exhibit it in my own family at times, So ask open-ended questions like, what is this like for you? What are you most concerned about? What's the greatest impact on you? What are the feelings this brings up for you? So one of our tendencies in these moments is to react to our own anxiety and not fully listen to the other person. So can we put our anxieties aside and really explore, what are you concerned about and why? The instant reaction most people have when you ask a question like, what are you concerned about, is that the person will start to talk about what they're anxious about, and then the listener will respond and try to calm that anxiety. And in essence, it kind of minimizes the sense of feeling heard, because you're trying to calm them down. And let them fully get their anxieties out, their concerns out, and then partner with them in talking about what can we do to make you feel less that way, rather than dictating that to them. That will build more resiliency in your relationships if you can kind of talk through that and work through that together. So these are all questions that you can use to listen to each other and connect with each other. So I'm going to talk a little bit about communicating with kids, because many of us are now stuck at home with kids. And this is both a challenge and an opportunity. So I'm going to start with talking about the COVID crisis itself. And much of this comes from the CDC and the National Association of School Psychologists. But you want to, with your kids, set the example. How you talk about the COVID crisis impacts how they're going to feel about this. Talk about how do we protect ourselves from the COVID-19 thing. Make sure that they're not excessively following these things on social media and TV. That's why I've limited myself to the nightly news. It's because I found myself in the first couple of days, watching the endless loop of CNN saying the same thing over and over and over again for 3 hours. That really just serves to heighten the anxiety. So monitor, you want to monitor the situation, but not get overwhelmed by it. Take time to talk and ask questions. Talk about how you manage your stress and anxiety so that your kids can learn from you about how do you deal with it. Talk about what you're doing to stay safe, and find outlets to manage your own stress and anxiety. Because again, your kids will absorb your stress and anxiety. So these are some things you can look at to see, these are signs of stress in kids in this situation. So if you have 3 to 6 year olds and they're returning to behaviors that they had grown out of, thumb sucking, bedwetting, or something like that, that's an indication that there's some sort of stress going on in their world. And so the psychological term is regressing to an earlier state where they had to be taken care of in a different way. So they're looking for attention and growth. So that's an opportunity to enter into an age-appropriate conversation with the 3 to 6 year olds. 7 to 10 year olds may seem mad, afraid, or have more difficulty concentrating. And preteens and teenagers you're gonna see more acting out, increased arguing, excessive mood swings, and sometimes difficulty talking about these things. But I kind of laughed when I looked at that, because most people describe talking to your teenagers about anything as being kind of difficult. But just some signs that you can use to monitor what's happening with your kids. So let's communicate. And again, this comes from the National Association of School Psychologists. So elementary school children, provide brief, simple information. You don't want to over-explain things because that can overwhelm them. You want to balance facts and reassure them that they're going to be safe. They're going to be okay. We're going to take care of them. And even if they do get sick, we're going to keep them safe. And give examples of people, how people are staying safe and stopping germs and staying healthy. So when you're talking about elementary and early middle school children, the age group is more vocal in asking questions. So you're going to have a greater opportunity to kind of talk with them on this. But they may need assistance separating reality from rumor and fantasy, especially if they're getting their news, if they're hearing things on TV. You have to help them understand that not every source of information is accurate, and separate the reality from rumor, and discuss what the community is doing to prevent these germs from spreading. And then for high school students, obviously you can give them much more data. You can point them to areas where they can get good information for themselves, where they can do their own research, but be honest, accurate, and factual about what's happening in terms of what you know. And engage them this is really, again, if we're going back to resiliency and building resiliency, engaging them in the process of making family plans, how we're going to react to this, how we're going to manage our schedule, how we're going to manage life at home. If you can engage them in that process, you're going to be increasing their sense of resiliency. But for all kids, encourage the conversation, encourage them to talk about their thoughts and feelings. And of course, all of that starts with you being able to do that yourself. So the kind of hidden gem in this whole thing is, now that we have all our kids at home, we actually have an opportunity. This is the family business professor coming out in me. We have an opportunity to cultivate the next generation because everybody's stuck at home together, right? So I came up with a few ideas about things we could do at home that actually may help to increase both our connection with our next generation and our business emotional cohesion in terms of our next generation's understanding of our family business. So we can have conversations about our family business and how our family business has survived previous crises. So if you have grandparents around, You can do a Zoom call and interview them about how did they deal with, World War II, or any whatever the crises were that they faced. You can talk about how we're using our values to make decisions in this situation. So we chose to, one family that I was talking to last week made the decision of, rather than laying people off, they had made everybody, including the senior leadership, take significant pay cuts, and the senior leadership took bigger pay cuts than the frontline staff. So talking about our values and why it led us to make the decisions that we made. Talk about the impact on all the stakeholders, so that it's not just about how it's hurting us, that everybody's a part of this. Engage them in a conversation about what we can do to help. If we can focus on things that we can do to help, it increases people's sense of control and stability in those moments. Review stories of failure from the past. Many of you may have heard me talking about our tendency is to talk about all the successes we've had, and there's really a great opportunity in this moment to learn from the failures that we've had as well. But talk about the important people in the life of your family business as well, both family and non-family. And I'm sure there are 100 other things, and I would love any ideas that you guys have on how you can use this opportunity when we're sequestered at home alone with family as a learning opportunity to teach people about our family business. The family needs to communicate to the business that the family's commitment to the business and show it tangibly if possible. Communicate with honesty what's going to change and what will stay the same, and ground all of your responses in your values. To the community, lead with your values, give back where you can. Acknowledge how some of your actions will impact the community. So think through all of the decisions you're making and how it will impact the community, and set the frame for a path forward. So resilient people, we want you to avoid feeling helpless and understand that the stress and the setbacks that we're experiencing now are an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for learning, an opportunity to reconnect with people in ways that we hadn't before. If we can be appreciative and show gratitude, we're going to increase our sense of connection. But we always need to have a staunch acceptance of reality. We need to operate on the facts and what we know, rather than being driven by anxiety and emotion. We don't want to deny anxiety and emotion. We want to recognize that it's there, but we want to manage it. But resilient individuals have a belief that life is meaningful, and they have strong values and the ability to improvise and self-govern. So we want to be building these in all of our family members. So what would a family look like that is building resiliency? So a family that's working on having difficult conversations and working through things. I have a number of families that have tried to overcome their natural tendency not to have difficult conversations by committing to having at least one challenging conversation every family meeting. You want to involve young people in decision-making at appropriate points, because if they're not involved growing up, we shouldn't expect them to be great at making decisions when they're older. Provide emotional, social, intellectual support, self-monitor and governance. So you want to encourage self-awareness. You want to monitor the family and its own health and encourage governance. Allow for obstacle thinking, which is, what are the obstacles are we going to face and how are we going to overcome them? Can we anticipate any of the challenges that we're going to face, and can we plan for them? We know that dad's going to die. Are we planning for it? Are we prepared for it, no matter when it comes? Recognition that being wealthy adds complexity, that it's a much more challenging situation in terms of complexity from a logistical standpoint. What can we do to help our families be more resilient? We can plan for the challenges lying ahead. We can provide opportunities for obstacles to be handled. So letting the next generation have struggles and learn through them. offer family stories that reflect on our errors, our hardships, and mistakes. So all of our mistakes are actually learning opportunities. I talked to one female CEO and asked her, so what was it that your parents did growing up that made you resilient? And she said, well, every time I made a mistake, my dad would ask me, what did you learn? So he set the frame for her that failing is about learning. It's not about feeling shame about failing, right? So focus on how others have faced hardships and come through. Define stress and anxiety as an opportunity for growth and capacity building. So you want to realize that resilience is a muscle that grows with experience. So the challenges that we face are what build our sense of resiliency. And we need to have the emotional availability and responsibility to deal with this. We need to have a certain level of confidence in ourselves, and our family connections can help each of us feel more confident. So as we're building resiliency in the family and that sense of connection with each other, that resiliency comes down to each of the individuals within the family. So this isn't just for the family, it makes everybody in your family more resilient. But also realize that we're going to have our bad moments. We're going to have failures. We're going to make mistakes. And one of the things that I think that's really important is that let's stay focused on the challenge ahead, which is getting through this together and communicating, and try to avoid endless sniping and criticism. We can do the after action review at the end and learn from that. But if we devolve into criticism and fighting and contempt for each other, that's going to make it harder for us to solve the issues. So we can do our after action reviews and figure out what went right or wrong later. But let's focus on getting through now. And let's take the opportunity once we get through this to think about what are the other situations, solutions, and problems that we may come up against, and how are we going to face those, and what did we learn through this crisis. So I'll leave you with this quote, and then we have some time for some questions. But success is not final, failure is not fatal, it's the courage to continue that counts. From Winston Churchill. So a man who survived many crises, and certainly this crisis is impacting us all, but it feels really good to be connected as a community in times like this, to be able to see your faces on the Zoom call. And thank you for participating, and I'll open it for questions now, Anne.
So we had some questions that came in during the presentation. Thanks, Andrew. And some of these, what I'd like you to do, if it's okay, is if you just want to respond in the chat box, that's great, because they're actually questions back to all of you. You are the experts. And then in addition to these questions that we'll ask this way, on Monday, we're going to send a link to the recorded presentation here today, as well as the slides. And what I would ask is the best way that we can help one another is to share information. And so I'm going to be asking a couple of questions in that email, and would really appreciate it if you would respond. They will put that information together, and it will go out in the Friday email that's coming out of FBC. And if you'd like it directly, I'm happy to send that to you as well. So the first question was, how long does everyone think that this is going to last?
So I would, I mean, I'm actually have no crystal ball on this, but I've been talking to a lot of people about this question, and I'm not promising anything here, but I think we're going to see, the reality is we're going to see a huge change regardless of when the recovery starts, right? So we're going to have a new norm, and it's going to be figuring out what that new norm is. So if you look at the data shows that most cities that implemented strong measures of social isolation and all that stuff start to hit the apex at about 43 days. So that's just talking about the curve of the disease itself. So in terms of the ability to get back to some level of normalcy as a city, and obviously We've got many different cities at many different parts of the curve. So we're talking at least 6 months. This is my opinion. This is not any, uh, you know, crystal ball, but we're at least 6 months before we get some sense of stability on this. And I think it's going to be another month or two before we have enough consistent testing to know uh, some of these things as well. So I think you're talking at least to 6 to 12 months to see bounce back.
All right, thank you. This is kind of a bigger question, and would love to hear back if anybody wants to enter stuff in the chat. One person wanted to know the percentage of companies that are furloughing workers versus pay cuts. And then there's another question after that. And if anybody feels good about responding to that.
Well, yeah, so please do respond in the chat. I'll share anecdotally and from past research. So past research shows that family businesses are slower to lay off in a downturn and quicker to hire in an upturn. So I think families' natural tendencies are to try to keep as many people employed as possible, which means that they're either repurposing employees or cutting salaries rather than laying people off, or so that's my anecdotal experience.
And we'll be asking that question again so that we can actually collect the data in a more specific way on Monday.
And actually, that's a part of the survey that we're going to be sending out, the research survey. We're going to be trying to gather data on what the actual reactions that families have been making. So that's going to come out in the next week or so. It's going to be a global survey we're doing to understand how family businesses are reacting in this crisis.
So just to clarify, I'm going to do just a flash survey, a couple questions on Monday to you all and to the people on this who've registered. And Andrew and the FBC will be sending through a much more comprehensive survey that we would really appreciate if you would participate in. That is going to hit all these parts that Andrew's walked through: the family, the business, the community, and so on. And that should be coming out in a couple of weeks. Then the third question is to think about what are the impacts on the family: compensation, travel, and dividends. So those are also things that people are very curious about.
Yeah. So this is where, if family members are reliant on dividends, and now our business's ability to pay dividends is measurably different. We have to balance that, right? We have to, how are we going to respond as a family to help a family member? And this is also a learning opportunity for that family member about how they manage their life and finances. But how do we as a family respond to a family member in need? And then how do we make the right business decisions, right? So just maintaining dividends, if it's going to kill the whole business because there's an individual need within the family, is probably a difficult situation. So most families that I have seen do have the family take more of a hit than non-family, that they tend to drop family salaries a little bit more. This is anecdotal. This is not scientific research, but families tend to take a sense of responsibility. And I know a couple of families where the family is not taking any salary because they have enough financial resources outside the business to take care of themselves, that they're focusing on taking care of their people in the company.
That's great, thank you. And just as just sort of an aside, FBC, we have at Loyola, we have a group of really talented coaches and experts who have offered to field phone calls and do triage if there's anybody out there that really would like and needs some immediate support. And if you are looking for some immediate support where you're in crisis, you can feel free to contact me, contact Andrew, or just via email or whatever, and we can set something up. We have 3 or 4 that have a variety of different expertise. Most of them are grounded in a psychotherapeutic background, but they also have the deep business background as well. So that's available to you, and we want to make sure that you know that. Okay. Nice little chat. I hope everybody's watching the chat box because people are actually jumping in there. Okay. Today, what also should have hit your email was a variety of resources that we put together in our Friday mailing. If you did not receive that, please let me know. You can email me at asmart@luc.edu. That's the letter A, and then my last name smart @luc.edu. And we can make sure that you get a copy of that. Within the body of that are some resources about the EIDL program and the paycheck program, if that's helpful. Everything around the CARES Act. Okay. One more opportunity to ask questions. I'm still watching this. Andrew, are you reading the chat?
I am highlighting my lack of technical skills and
Awesome. Yes.
can't find the. Oh wait, maybe this is the chat. I don't know.
We like to say we have other skills.
Yeah.
Okay. It looks like people are continuing to chat, so we won't close this down yet. I'm going to just take advantage of the all call too, just as an FYI. Some of my colleagues in the Loyola Leadership Hub have taken up the charge of securing PPE wherever they can. Most of these folks are located in our supply and value chain center. If you have access to PPE that you would like to make available for distribution, this is not for free. They're actually for purchase. My colleagues in the Supply Value Chain Center are organizing that for the Chicagoland area. Oh, awesome. I hope you're all reading this. Demco is now making approved face shields.
Cool.
Yep. What are the ethics of closing even when we're not mandated by local health policy? You want to touch that one, Andrew?
Yeah, well, I think you have to think about your, again, I would go back to your values on how you would deal with that. It's, I just figured out how to find the chat. So I think really it comes back to your values and your sense of can you operate safely, right? Do you have enough information that you feel like you can operate safely and not put your employees at risk? So what that's meant for many families is they run smaller shifts where they can keep people at greater different distances. They have very strict rules about social distance, and they've increased their cleaning. They do much deeper cleaning than they would on a regular basis. So basically, families that have decided to stay in operation have altered how they operate in order to reduce the likelihood that people are going to catch the virus. But that it's a hard question to answer, and I think again it comes back to making the best decision you can make based on your values, based on what you know about the virus, and following the guidance from the CDC and other governmental organizations.
Andrew, here's a good one too. What are family businesses that are larger than 500 people doing that are not getting any help from the government?
Well, I would say the ones that I've been talking to have been battening down the hatches. They're preserving cash. They're taking care of their people. So many of those businesses have more flexibility to take care of things. And so um, they're really looking at things in terms of trying to get through the immediate and preserve cash so that they can stay upright. They're doing financial projections to figure out what's their runway. They're talking to their lenders to understand what flexibility they have if this goes on 6, 12, 18 months. So they're being proactive and trying to identify what they can control, what they know, and trying to manage as conservatively as possible. Some of them actually, if they're in good cash positions and they're not carrying a lot of debt, are seeing this as an opportunity to buy, make investments because of costs of things have come down. Some of them are starting to realize that there's an opportunity to attract talent in a situation like this. So people who are being laid off of other companies that may be very a public company that may be laying off people, that they may be able to find people who are really talented that just haven't uh, had the opportunity. So
Andrew, another question is, what do you do if you don't have already a formal or a developed family plan, family business strategy? Not everybody has a family council, not everybody has a family system set up like that.
So it depends on how big the family is, so if you can get everybody together on a Zoom call or in an appropriately social distanced room, if you're small enough to get everybody in one conversation, I would create a list of designate 1 or 2 family leaders and start to have conversations about the things that people are concerned about and try to open up channels of communication. Now, this may be hard if you have existing fault lines in your family, because those fault lines may show up in this meeting. So having a facilitator or seeking kind of professional help if you think that there are fault lines that are going to make these things difficult, I think is important. If you're larger than that, I think you have to designate a task force, a small group of people that are going to help coordinate communication with the family. You want to make sure that the management of the business doesn't have to get distracted from dealing with the business crisis in order to deal with family crises. So you want to have a group of leadership, and it doesn't mean you can't have family employees on that as a part of that group. It's just you don't want the CEO and senior management team necessarily to be worrying about family communication.
That's good. A couple of responses from Brett Snyder. We're over 500 and so far have not had to put in pay cuts or furloughs, and we've had all our plants operating. But if it gets deeper, longer, then we may have to face some tougher choices. And Robert Passage from Pivot Point said we had an employee that tested positive. Our landlord arranged to have our offices deep cleaned. We had already implemented full-time work from home policy because of the government mandate. That's good. So I'm conscious of our time. We're at about 2:24, and we said we would close up at 2:30. Before we finish up, we would love to know what else that you need. What else might we do? We're doing a series of 8 bi-weekly webinars with different topics. And in some cases, we have people lined up to speak within those sort of case study type presentation. But in many cases, we'll have subject matter experts like Andrew, and I think Andrew will come back again when it's time for us to talk about the board and the board's role during the crisis. But if there's something specific that you would like some more knowledge about, or some connections, please reach out. You can use the chat box here, or again, you can email Andrew or myself. I'm at asmart@luc.edu, and Andrew is at Keyt, spelled Keyt, at luc.edu. And more than anything, we wish you well. We are your cheerleaders, and believe everything that you do is so incredibly important. We know how hard this is for you right now, and we are really hanging in there for you. So hang in.
Hang in there, everybody.
So we're going to say goodbye. Thanks again, Andrew. It was awesome.
Great.